There's been crystal balls, analyst speculation, and of course, the good old cryptic tweets. So, what's really the deal with Isaiah Hill?
You are Locked On Boilermakers, your daily podcast on the Purdue Boilermakers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome into another episode of Locked On Boilermakers here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, the number one sports podcast network where it's your team every day. As always, I am your host. I am Nick Arvin, but today I have a very special guest with me. We got Dustin Schutte, writer for Purdue on SI, does some great written work. Make sure to go check him out over there on SI. But we got a lot to talk about on the agenda today. We're talking about Isaiah Hill in this 2027 recruiting class that's gotten a lot of different buzz energy throughout social media and in the online spaces. Then we're going to get into what I think is going to be the starting lineup. Way too early as we sit here on May 15th, but we'll give a little bit of a projection there. And then we'll finish off today's episode getting into some expectations for the 2026 recruiting class. Who's going to redshirt? Who's going to hit that rotation as we get into this next year. So thank you for joining me, Dustin. And I just want to go ahead and jump right into things today, talking about Isaiah Hill. And as we kind of get into the dog days, the 2027 class has really been the one big buzz surrounding Purdue basketball that we have right now. And you look at Isaiah Hill, it was Kevin Savage 2 or 3 weeks ago, but now we're at a point with Isaiah Hill where that's all anyone's talking about. And maybe it's baseless, maybe it's not, but we saw a crystal ball about 2 weeks ago, which kind of really got the energy up surrounding Purdue circles. And now we're in the spot where we have cryptic tweets, which may or may not be based off a Discord chat that claims and speculates that Isaiah Hill is committing today. What would you say, Dustin, to Purdue fans out there that are kind of trying to hold their expectations back, that we want a realistic, we don't want to be overhyped or have our expectations over analyzed, I guess, to say that Isaiah Hill is committing soon, while also holding, hey, we want Isaiah Hill on our team. We think he would be a great center.
Yeah, I think what's important to remember, I think a lot of the chatter online comes usually after these crystal ball predictions are made. Everybody wants to say they have inside sources. And look, maybe there are some people that do. Like, Indiana's a basketball heavy state. Obviously, I believe Jeff Teague is the head coach at Pike. So obviously he's got ties to the Indy area. There's probably some kids that went to Pike that know something. Like, there's probably some information out there, but I'm just very skeptical when people get very cryptic after the fact that it's been posted as a crystal ball projection. Like the On3 people know what they're doing, the Rivals people, the 24/7 Sports people all know what they're doing. So from what I have gathered, and look, I'll be honest, like I've reached out to Isaiah. And I know some people that have talked with him. I think that Purdue and Louisville seem to be the two front runners. I don't have any inside information in terms of what way he's leaning one way or another. I wish I did. But it does seem like it's heading that direction where he would come to Purdue. And why not? When you look at the recent success that Purdue has had under Matt Painter in terms of developing big men, like you can go all the way back to Juwan Johnson, but you throw in A.J. Hammonds, Isaac Haas, Zach Edey, Trey Kaufman-Renn, Caleb Swangan. All those guys have gone on to be successful at Purdue, and then all of them, I believe everybody I've named was at least picked up in some way, shape, or form for the NBA. So it's a really interesting time, because not only would this mean that he would be the highest rated recruit to commit to Purdue in program, or at least in the history of the recruiting rankings, right? Glenn Robinson might have been higher if they had recruiting rankings back in the 90s. But you could have, in back-to-back years, the top prospect out of Indiana in Luke Ertel and then Isaiah Hill, which is a big feather in the cap to Matt Painter and just the job that he's done recruiting the state of Indiana.
We're definitely going to talk about Luke Ertel a little bit later in the show, but as you mentioned, he would top Caleb Swangan for being the top recruit, at least in the Matt Painter era. And that's honestly why I'm so hyped about the potential of landing someone like Isaiah Hill, because of the way that Matt Painter's already being viewed. And in a changing landscape of college basketball, as you know right now, transfer portal's crazy, NIL is crazy. Matt Painter has always been a guy. He's consistently able to be one of the best retaining head coaches in the nation. And when you look at the development, he's consistently been one of the best there, especially when you look at these lists of 7-footers. So I feel like if you go off a 2026 recruiting class, and you can throw the baby Boilers at me, but I view it statistically as one of, if not the best classes that Matt Painter has ever brought in. You stack that on top of maybe landing an Isaiah Hill or maybe landing a Kevin Savage. I feel like that kind of changes the way that Matt Painter is viewed as a recruiter. And that's so important right now in terms of roster building in the current times of college basketball. So that's kind of why I've claimed that if we do land Isaiah Hill, he would be a game-changing prospect. And I've gotten a little bit a backlash on that. Ray Davis said that he was more like an Xavier Booker, who also comes from Indy, then goes to UCLA. But I personally think that there are some intangibles that you can't teach that Isaiah Hill has. His ability to jump is really incredible. He's pretty agile for a 7-footer, which is also one of those things. He can get a little bit bigger, compete a little bit more in the post, which is kind of the deal with a lot of 7-footers. But what's your read on Isaiah Hill actually as a basketball player? What do you expect? And do you think he would be that game-changing prospect for Purdue?
Yeah, that's an interesting take, because I think that what has I don't want to say what has tended to happen, but I think there are a lot of guys at Purdue that have come in that have not been quote unquote game changing, but then end up being, you look at Braden Smith, who was not a heavily recruited prospect. CJ Cox was headed to the Ivy League. Zach Edey only had a handful of offers until Purdue swooped in and extended an offer to him. So it's hard for me to say, just because I feel like a guy like Carson Edwards was the guy who maybe turned the tide. Yeah. And you can go back. I think the Baby Boilers were the first group, like the first true class. And you've had some NBA level prospects in that mix, but you think back, I don't remember again, I'm going to have to go back to Glenn Robinson, but I don't remember since then when Purdue had a high volume shooter who could just go turn into a microwave, until Carson Edwards. And I think that opened the door, not just for Purdue has always been a place where big men could go and get developed and maybe go to the next level and at least have some level of impact. But in terms of the guard play, shortly after that, you get Jaden Ivey, you get Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer. Now there's guys like Kevin Savage, Xavier Skipworth, also in that 2027 class, who are interested. So to me, it's an interesting question. I think it will probably change the perception simply because he's a 5-star recruit, and Purdue doesn't typically land the 5-star recruits. The only one I think they've had is Caleb Swanigan, is the only one that's been a 5-star. So I think in that respect, it would probably be viewed a little bit differently, but I really like his ability to, I think the one thing that stands out to you more than maybe some of the other bigs is I think he's more ready on the defensive end, just his ability to shot block, his mobility, probably defend multiple positions, probably does need to get a little bit stronger and be a little bit better rebounder. Offensively, I think that stuff kind of comes, and it depends on the offense and what type of point guard you have and how you can get into your sets and how you run the floor. But overall, I think he's just, I think that the big lumbering guys in Purdue basketball have been always compared to Isaac Haas, and some of those more agile bigs have been compared to like a Matt Harms or Juwan Johnson. So I think he's probably going to be in that category of a Juwan Johnson and a Matt Harms, just simply in the sense that I think he's going to be more versatile. He might be able to stretch the floor. Maybe he can step out behind the 3-point line and knock down some shots. But as we know, Purdue also likes to bury those guys in the post, get strong bodies in there, and just dominate the painted area. So it's a really intriguing prospect. And I think that the other thing too is, if you get a player like Isaiah Hill, there's going to be other guys in that class, as you mentioned, Kevin Savage and Xavier Skipworth. I think Purdue is in like his top 4 or 5 or something. I tried to reach out to him the other day, but then it becomes more appealing for those guys to commit, knowing they're going to be playing alongside other great players. So it's kind of this snowball effect. And if you can get one in that class, then watch out, because you might be able to get a couple more. And I think that that's to an extent also what happened with the 2026 class, and why that's, in my opinion, a top 10 class.
Absolutely. So last thing I want to pick your mind about when we talk about Isaiah Hill is kind of the roster construction right now, because if you look at going into the future, at least the center position isn't exactly wide open. You've got Daniel Jacobsen, who there's criticism to be made about the way that his season ended last year. You got Raleigh Burgess, who redshirts this last year. Does he slot in at the 4? Does he slot in at the 5? But then you have Sinan Huan, who, once again, we'll talk about him in that recruiting class a little bit later. But for an Isaiah Hill and for that archetype where it's that 5-star, and typically you see Matt Painter retain these guys. But when you have 5 stars like that, there's a lot of, I want to go to the NBA because that's how I was rated out of high school. So what would you see Isaiah Hill? Let's put on our hypothetical hats. Let's say that the Discord cryptic tweeters are right today. He commits today. What happens with Isaiah Hill the next 2 years?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. Well, I think the interesting thing is, and I know we're going to talk about like lineup predictions and how this kind of roster is constructed, but one of the things that I spoke with Sinan Huan's head coach at Georgetown Prep, Howard Blue, and the thing that stood out more than anything that we talked about was basically like Sinan, he thinks, is going to be more suited to play the 4 than the 5. Okay. So then you think about that. So you have a guy who's 7'1", who can play the 4. Then if you look at the roster construction at that center position, as you mentioned, Raleigh Burgess. So to me, and I've got to think about this in terms of the roster looking ahead, but off the top of my head, that would put then Raleigh Burgess and Sinan Huan at the 4 position, because Caden Pierce is going to be gone. Right. You could probably slot Jack Benner into there for a few minutes, but I think he would probably be best suited at the 3. And then you look at Daniel Jacobsen at the 5, and you look at Isaiah Hill at the 5. And this is all assuming nobody transfers out, right? Like that's always the piece that you don't know year to year, season to season. But as you've mentioned, like Matt Painter's done a really good job of retaining talent, but I think that Isaiah Hill, a lot of guys come, join the program. I even remember this with like Omer Mayer. There were some people thinking he was going to be a one and done. So like, just because you're a top a 5-star recruit doesn't mean you're going to come in and head to the NBA the next year. It could be a 2-year process with Isaiah Hill. It could be more than that. Like the way the college game has played, he has the option to stay at Purdue and develop and improve his draft stock year over year. The one thing I can say is, like, we've learned from Matt Painter, doesn't matter who you are, how many stars you have by your name, you're not going to get an automatic starting job. It's going to go to the best player. And if Isaiah Hill is that best player at the 5 spot, I just would say, I guess the one thing is, let's assume that Jacobsen, Juwan, Burgess, and Hill are all on that 27-28 roster. I think it's more Jacobsen and Hill at the 5, so you could probably split minutes there, and then you'd have Burgess and Juwan at the 4, and that would probably be a better idea of your roster makeup as opposed to jamming all of those guys into the 4 or into the 5 spot.
Well, no matter what happens, if he goes to Louisville or if those cryptic posters are correct and he does end up going to Purdue, Isaiah Hill is going to be a big talent for wherever he ends up. But coming up here next, we're going to take a look at more of a present. We're going to get out of the future talk about next year, what the roster is going to look like next year, and more specifically, that starting lineup, our predictions. Coming up here next on Locked On Boilermakers. If you've ever opened your bank account and thought, where did all my money go? You're not alone. Keeping track of subscriptions, spending, and bills can get overwhelming fast, but that's where Rocket Money comes in. They help you take control of your finances all in one place. They track your subscriptions in one spot to help you cancel the ones you don't need with just a few taps. And you can set budgets, get alerts, and stay on top of upcoming bills. It just makes everything feel more organized and gives you a clear picture of your finances day to day. Using Rocket Money, I've already cut out over $50 a month month, which really stacks up over the course of a few months or even going into a year. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings quick. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, we're back for segment 2 here on today's episode of Locked On Boilermakers, where we're getting into 2026. More specifically, what our starting lineup is going to look like. And before we do this, I feel like we have to go ahead and say, for the record, CJ Cox will be starting at the shooting guard position. You can move him over potentially, depending on what you want to do with your guards. But either way you cut it, CJ Cox will be in the starting lineup. But one of the biggest debates or conversations right now is the point guard battle. And I didn't think that this would be the case even 6 months ago, because you look at where Omer Mayer comes in, and you hit on this. The expectations that we set for Omer Mayer were just through the roof. And whether he played up to those expectations, that can be debated. I think he struggled at times last year. But when you have the NCAA assist king, your production isn't necessarily going to be incredibly high at the point guard position. So now Braden Smith is gone. There is an opening at point guard. Is it Omer Mayer? Well, a lot of Purdue fans think that. But then you hear Matt Painter talk about Luke Ertel like he's one of the best freshmen he's ever seen, with intestinal fortitude more than anyone you've ever seen. If you watch Luke Ertel play, he's a tough kid, gets on the floor, used to play quarterback. So you have to give that to him. I think that his game is definitely going to translate to the college game. Personally, I think there's a case to make for Luke Ertel starting at point guard. I'll let you give your little take on that, whether it's Omer Mayer, whether it's Luke Ertel, but I'm going to be honest. I think that Luke Ertel's hard to keep off the floor in his freshman year.
Yeah, I think he's going to play. I don't think there's any question about that. Yeah. And part of me kind of wonders, like, is this going to be a 2024-25 situation where Jakari started the year in those first 13, 14 games, and then CJ Cox, they kind of discovered that it was better to have him on the floor in that starting rotation and for Jakari to come off the bench? Do we have a situation where maybe Omer's more ready for that first, basically the non-conference portion of the schedule, and then by the time Luke Ertel catches up, he's the clear front runner? I don't know. The one thing I would say is, and you're correct, I think that it's fair to say that at times Omer struggled during that season, during his first season at Purdue. But at the same time, he was also learning a different position, sure. Wasn't playing the type of minutes he was accustomed to playing overseas, at least in some of those earlier years. I know when he got up to the EuroLeague, this was kind of more of the role he played, where he would come off the bench and he might play 8 minutes or he might play 18. So I think kind of adjusting to that maybe hindered his growth a little bit. I'm really interested to see what he does with the basketball in his hands all the time. He seems to me like people have compared him to obviously Braden Smith, like just a taller version of Braden Smith. I don't think he's as good of a passer, but I do think he's going to be a better scorer. This is going to be probably one of the more interesting battles, because it does sound like, and I think, I'm victim of this, and I'm in a lot of the press conferences, I'm at a lot of the games, and I hear Matt Painter talk a lot, but I think we have a tendency to believe what he says in terms of, like, I shouldn't say believe what he says. I should say maybe take it too far, in the sense that he says Luke Ertel looks ready. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a starter who plays 30 minutes a game. Ready could mean, I'm going to come in and I'm going to be a backup and I'm going to give Omer Mayer level production as he was as a freshman. It could be a guy who comes in and plays 15 minutes, or on a certain night maybe plays 25 and has a big game or something like that. So I don't want to read too much into that now. I think I would still give the edge to Omer, because I think he's going to get the opportunity to play the position he's more comfortable with. And then, we could also see situations like we saw last year where Braden would at sometimes slip over to the 2, and Omer would run the point, or vice versa. You'd have Omer at the 2. There could be situations where Omer comes in and maybe Luke plays the 2. I don't think that would happen. My guess would be Luke comes in to substitute, and maybe Omer shifts over to the 2 because he's a little bit more, he has more experience playing that role. So that's going to be an interesting battle. There's no doubt in my mind Luke Ertel is playing, just in what capacity and how many minutes would be the question right now.
Okay, let's move it over to the 3. This is a topic of discussion for me because when you talk about Jakari Harris and kind of what he's been, starts as a freshman, then realize that CJ Cox is going to play that role a little bit better. There wasn't much room for him to move into the starting lineup last year with all the seniors returning and then bringing in Oscar Clough. Obviously, he wouldn't start at center anyway, but you have four seniors in the starting lineup. Now those 4 seniors are gone, and there are going to be those roles this year. So I've kind of said for Jakari Harris, if this isn't the year where he fits into the starting lineup, why does he come back to Purdue? I'm glad that he ended up coming back to Purdue. I think that he is going to be a pivotal part of this team in 2026. But from a player perspective, that has to be the reason you come back to Purdue, is because you think you can compete for that starting spot. And I think that it's his job to lose. But then once again, we've seen at times where he'll ball out to start the year, ball out in exhibitions, ball out in scrimmages. But then once you actually get to the regular season, a lot of that production starts to drop off. So for Jakari Harris, I think this is going to be a pivotal year within his collegiate career. And I feel like if he earns it and if he does do his job, it should be his starting spot to lose.
Yeah, that's going to be the other interesting battle, is it? Because I think there are a couple different guys you could slip into that spot, right? Like one of the things, I think Caden Pierce is probably slotted into that 4 spot, but he could also potentially play the 3. He's only listed at 6'6", right? So you could have a situation where maybe you have Jacob, and I'm just throwing out hypotheticals, Jacobsen at the 5, Burgess at the 4, Pierce at the 3. I don't know, but you could also see a situation where they go smaller and have Jakari at the 3, or they could have Antoine West. You could even probably make a case for Jack Benner. Is Jack Benner the starting 3, right? Like he gave Purdue some really good minutes off the bench too. So that's a really interesting position. I think the one thing that for me, Jakari, at least in his first 2 seasons, so obviously this is going to be the same for his 3rd season. I've had a chance to talk with him in the offseason. He is a team first guy through and through. And so he wants the team to be successful. And he has said multiple times, like, I don't view coming off the bench as a negative. I view it as a way that I can continue to help this team. Doesn't mean he doesn't want to start, right? Like, I'm sure he would love to play 30 minutes a game and be, one of the top 3 scorers on this basketball team. And maybe that's something he can do. I do think that we haven't seen Jakari be unleashed just yet because of what you mentioned. Like the roster's been so clogged that there's just been too many players at that position. If he wins the starting job and he's able to play 20 to 25 minutes or maybe more per game, what does that look like? We haven't seen him in that sort of role just yet. And so I think that's the exciting thing, is this is a guy that, he's had kind of a unique season, right? Like as a freshman, he really struggled, but in Big Ten play, I believe he was a 40% 3-point shooter. This past season, he had games where he really struggled at Mackey Arena, but would go on the road and, he'd put up 10 or 12 points and really be productive. And sometimes that's a guy you need. So I think that there's going to be some interesting battles. I'm curious to see what they do at the 3 spot, whether that's Jakari, whether that's Antoine West. I mean, Braden Smith said he thought Antoine was going to lead the team in scoring. To me, that also means something. Maybe I'm putting a little too much stock into that, but I think Jakari is an interesting case. But I can tell you, like, a lot of the things he wanted to work on last season and what he's going to work on this offseason is he wants to be a better off-ball defender. He wants to be a better communicator. He wants to be a leader. And more than starting, he wants to be a guy that finishes games for Purdue. He wants to be in those closing minutes, trying to help Purdue get victories when it's in those tight situations down the stretch.
We saw him do that in the round of 32 against Miami when CJ Cox goes down with a hyperextension. So it's going to be a very interesting offseason for Jakari Harris. For the sake of time, we'll call the 4 spot Caden Pierce. Will you agree with that? I feel like he was brought in for just that reason. Okay, moving on to the 5. This is interesting because I was wondering, does Matt Painter try to go after a center in the transfer portal purely because of the fact that Daniel Jacobsen didn't end off the year too hot? There were times where Jacobsen showed a lot of upside over the winter months, even splitting 20 minutes with Oscar Clough. But then the year progresses, his minutes get cut drastically because on the defensive side, it was a little bit sketchy. He wasn't really able to hold his own at times within the post. What do you think Daniel Jacobsen needs to do this offseason to become that starting center that he was brought in to be to Purdue?
I think key number one is get stronger. You have to be a more effective rebounder at 7'4". And I thought he did a really good job for the position he was in terms of the non-conference portion of the schedule. I think what you saw this past season was him getting worn down by having to play a Big Ten conference schedule, like a tough schedule from start to finish, but primarily a Big Ten conference schedule with so many really good bigs. Really, had to have Oscar Clough on the floor in order for Purdue to have success, especially late in the year in the Big Ten and NCAA tournament. So the one thing, again, as soon as the season ended, I kind of released my prediction for the starting lineup next year, and I had Raleigh Burgess slotted in at that 5 spot because he's 6'11". He's a little bit more mobile. I think he's a little bit stronger than Jacobsen. But the way Matt Painter has been talking, like he expects a big jump from Daniel Jacobsen this next season. So again, I think it comes down to him getting the opportunity to play more minutes, which he will certainly have this coming year. And it comes down to him getting stronger. Like I think when he's in that lob threat, I think he's really good. I think he can shot block. So he's got to just be a little bit more disciplined. Can't pick up those ticky-tack fouls. Know when to go straight up. Know when to attack block shots. But this is going to be he's coming off his first full year. So this will be really his second year. But we saw that Zach Edey jump from sophomore to junior. Well, even though he didn't play his freshman year, really, Daniel Jacobsen is now in that sophomore to junior window where he's going to be the primary big. So can he make that I'm not saying he's going to be Zach Edey, but he doesn't need to be. Like, can you be 50% more productive than you were last season? And if you can average, 10 points or 8 to 10 points and 6 to 8 rebounds a game, I think Purdue would take that, considering what they also have on the roster.
We talked about this starting lineup, our projections. We're going to finish off today's episode of Locked On Boilermakers, getting into the 2026 class that might crack that rotation as well. That's coming up here next on Locked On Boilermakers. All right, we're back to finish off today's episode of Locked On Boilermakers Rapid Fire, talking about the 2026 recruiting class. We already got to Luke Ertel, talked about him a little bit, so I want to get into the 3 other guys, specifically Jacob Weber, who is one of the 2 guys coming over from Louisville. Obviously, that pipeline is kind of strong right now with different guys coming from Louisville, but I feel like Jacob Weber is one of the most hyped up guys to come out of there in recent memory in terms of being that sharp shooter from 3. What do you expect from Jacob Weber this year? Do you think he's going to play in 2026?
Boy, man. Again, it comes down to that 3 spot, right? This is a tough one. I think there's a lot of interesting guys in this class, but Jacob Weber is a lights out shooter. He's a guy that was again rated as a 3-star in the hundreds. And then this past season, after he transfers to La Lumiere, he really catapults because of his shooting ability, right? So if you can shoot and you can be productive, especially on catch and shoot or coming off screens, Purdue's going to find a place because they're just coming off the season, which they were the most efficient Ken Palm offense in the history of college basketball. But it depends to me on what are the other things you do well. Are you a good defensive player? Are you good without the ball? Can you rebound? What else can you bring to the floor? How good of a passer are you? So I think that Jacob Weber will play. I would not I think he could probably be in that 8 to 12 minute per game range, but he's to me the most interesting in this upcoming class.
Okay, then this is the guy that I get the most comments about, the most hate about, because apparently I undervalue what he is. But either way, Sinan Huan. Sinan Huan is one of those guys that I don't know. Does he redshirt this year, or does he play truly because the center position? I mean, you got guys, but is it incredibly deep to the amount where you're not going to have to redshirt Sinan Huan? What's your view on him? Do you think he redshirts, or do you think he plays this year?
I think he'll play. I think his defensive ability is something that Purdue's going to need. I think he's a really good shot blocker. He did not play. I'm not going to remember what it's called. The Nike Hoop Summit, I think is what it's called. He didn't play particularly well in that, but he's going to be going up against Daniel Jacobsen, Raleigh Burgess. He's going to be seeing some really good guards at Purdue, like CJ Cox, Jakari, Luke Ertel, Omer, throw those guys into the mix. So he's going to have time to kind of adapt to that next level. I do think he's going to play because of the way he can space the floor, because of his defensive ability. I think he's probably the most defensive ready player of that incoming freshman class. So I think he's going to see some time on the floor. And part of this too, Nick, is the red shirt question is an interesting one because obviously the NCAA is trying to get that 5-for-5 pushed, right? So one of the things that's interesting to me is like, could you see a situation where, and I don't mean to backtrack here a little bit, but like a Jacob Weber, is he a guy that comes in and plays the last 5 minutes? There's no penalty. In previous years, maybe he's a guy that would redshirt, or Sinan would be a guy who redshirts. But if you don't really have that opportunity, can you get those guys some minutes and maybe they continue to progress throughout the year? But I feel more confident that Sinan's going to be on the floor just because I think he can play both the 4 and the 5 and gives them a really good defensive presence, a guy who's bigger and can guard multiple positions on the floor.
So maybe I am undervaluing Sinan Huan. I think he's going to be a star. I just don't know when. Obviously, averaged 5 blocks a game for Team China in that U19 World Cup. Unbelievable. But let's move on to our last guy. And assuming that 5-for-5, once again, putting our hypothetical hats on here for a second, that the NCAA gets it done, institutes the 5-for-5. The red shirt's necessarily not as necessary as what it has been in the past. What does that mean for Rivers Knight, who is going to be the guy that is the most underrated out of this class? Yeah. And I mean, maybe you could say that's because the other guys are just absolute studs, but also you look at some injuries in high school that happened to Rivers Knight. Does that force his rating down a little bit? Is that the reason why we're undervaluing him, or are the other guys just in a more ready to play mode than what Rivers Knight is right now? Jacob Weber's teammate at Louisville.
Yeah, I think the thing with Rivers Knight is there's just not a lot out there about him. He could very well come in and he could be the Braden Smith, right? He could be the one that everybody's undervaluing. And then all of a sudden you look at day one and he's maybe not, I don't think he's going to be a starter, but he could be the backup for or something, just a guy who comes out of nowhere. But part of this is just reading too much. And I'm guilty of this. Too much of it is reading into the recruiting rankings. A 3-star guy who ranks in the hundreds, I think it is. I don't remember if it's lower. I can't remember exactly where he finished. I think that's part of it. You look to try to see film on him. There's not a ton out there. It's hard to, so to me, and it looked like he had kind of a raw, like he has the potential to be a really good post player. But he's going to need some work. So to me, my immediate thought is if this was the old school days, if this was 4 years ago, he's a guy that's going to be redshirting or even 2 years ago, right? He's a guy that's going to be redshirting and will then, maybe not have the same level of success as Trey Coppin-Wren because that was a pretty steep climb there, but can come in and be productive at some point in his career. He is again, I say Jacob Weber is the biggest mystery because I think that he's the one that could, if he comes in and he's a starter at the 3 spot, he could be a starter. He could be a guy that doesn't see any time. I don't know. Rivers Knight, I feel more confident is probably going to see limited minutes, if any minutes at all. I just think there's not enough out there on him right now. But again, he could be one of those guys that's just flying under the radar, comes in and is a traditional diamond in the rough for Purdue recruiting and comes in and plays 15, 20 minutes a game and averages, 8 and 6 or something like that.
All right, well, you got our answers. Isaiah Hill between Purdue and Louisville. Do we see a commitment today? Maybe. We got our starter picks out there. Dustin, you are Omer, CJ. Was it Antoine West or Jakar Harris?
I had Antoine in the initial one. Yep,
okay. Antoine, Caden Pierce, and then Raleigh Burgess. I've got maybe Luke Ertel. We'll see. CJ Cox, Jakar Harris, Caden Pierce, and Daniel Jacobsen. And then no matter what, no matter how you stack it up, this 2026 recruiting class is bound to be good. So thank you, Dustin Schutte, for coming on the show today. If you guys haven't, make sure to check him out. It's a must read over there on Purdue SI. By far, some of the best written work that you're going to find surrounding the Purdue Boilermakers. Thank you for coming on the show. But as always, boiler up, hammer down.